Hello, this is Fabio Terezinho from AVEVA. It's my pleasure to be here in Houston at AVEVA Day with Rene Moreda from InflexionPoint. Rene, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having us and for hosting this event, Fabio. It's fantastic.
Nice. It's just a success because partners and customers like yourself make it a success. So very happy to have you here.
Fantastic. I tell you what, I've spent the day in some of these sessions and my takeaway is the enthusiasm and the energy level.
Wonderful.
Really, really high. I'm loving it, right?
Yeah.
And I encourage you guys to continue to do some of these events because from our perspective, they're extremely valuable, right?
It is the ecosystem, right? As much as we work with technology, we talk about products and so on, it's really about people, right? It's really about people taking attitudes, making decisions, leveraging this technology and improving, right? At the end of the day is what we're here to do.
Oh, absolutely. I look at it as a community, right? You could stay at home, read some white papers, right? But it's not the same, right? No. This gives you the ability to network with your peers, to network with customers, to validate some of the things that that we're seeing. To understand some of the challenges that they're experiencing and to talk to the source of the company that's putting the platform in place to help drive those solutions.
Learn from each other, right?
Absolutely.
And talking about learning, I just learned a few minutes ago from you exciting news about a new acquisition from InflexionPoint.
Yes, we're really excited. We just acquired a company called Process Innovation. They are fully focused on Pi software. So for us, given the fact that we're making investments in the AVEVA platform and we're putting our bets on this platform because we look at it from the edge all the way up to the cloud to being able to enable that industrial operational excellence, if you will, right? Pi for us is really the foundation for that digital transformation, right? And when you connect Pi to AVEVA Connect, it's so much more powerful. And as an integrator, that gives us the opportunity and the ability to really integrate and provide additional services and value add on top of that platform.
Now, congratulations and glad that you're combining this expertise. And I think it has a little bit to do with your own history as well, Rene, because you worked over a decade for Microsoft as well, right? And then worked on multiple OT industrial companies. So you have both the, let's say, the IT and the OT side of the business from an experience point of view. And when you hear about OT IT integration nowadays, what does it mean to you based on your background on each one of those sides of the fence that used to be very isolated and more is becoming one now?
It's amazing for me, right? It's really the coming together of two different worlds, right? You've experienced this, right? There was always a segregation between IT and OT, right? OT didn't want you working on their systems because they didn't trust IT, right? It's 24 hours, has to be always on, always running, right? But it was limited because they weren't able to leverage the best practices of IT and the infrastructure and the scalability and the support. And if you're in the OT world, you had to be, a chemist, a process engineer, but you also had to be an IT guy, right? And we're kind of doing away with that, and cross-pollination is playing a good role there. And what I really like about the coming together is the fact that it gives us the opportunity to drive bigger solutions, solutions that are much more powerful, that are enterprise-wide, that have a bigger impact for our customers, add more value.
Absolutely. I see exactly the same way. And for you believe that tools built for IT are suitable for OT and vice versa, or there is still a market for each one of them, but with interoperability?
Great question. A very insightful question, right? So I think you guys at AVEVA are experiencing it, right? As you're building technology into your platforms, right? As you're integrating MCP into the core of the product, right? That's infrastructure, right? Because you're enabling agentic, AI agents to handle workflow and to integrate. Kubernetes, comes from the IT world, comes from the cloud world. I see a lot of OT companies using it now. Container applications, being able, to run in a containerized environment on a small footprint. A lot of all this stuff originated in the IT world. So coming together and being able to leverage some of those technologies. And I think AVEVA's doing a good job and headed in that direction. Fantastic.
Excellent. And it's great to see integrators like yourself that through acquisitions and organically both are acquiring expertise, right, and experience on both sides and on the integration of the two. Because I asked the question, and I agree with you, and from my point of view, it is really about keeping the domain knowledge from each one of those two areas, but find a way to drive synergies integrating them. So I don't believe, for example, that a IT-based database like SQL Server would replace a OT-based historian like Pi, right?
Correct.
Because they lack the specific requirements that are driven by typical OT data, right? Time series data, timestamp, and engineering units, minimum value, maximum value, scalability, performance, reliability, and so on. They are very specific and extremely important requirements from OT that are not necessarily on the top list of priorities for IT and vice versa, right? So I still believe that just like there is a place for Pi, absolutely in the present, definitely in the future, versus the other on-prem databases, when you come to the cloud, same thing, right? You have Connect as the industrial platform on the cloud, right? On the infrastructure for sharing OT data with other systems, just like you have warehouses and data lakes from Microsoft, AWS, Databricks, Snowflake, ServiceNow, NVIDIA, all the other companies, right? But the difference is, differently from what I heard so many times in the past, is not about keeping IT system as far away as from the OT systems, is how to better integrate them, right? How to get this OT data and deliver value to the AT systems and vice versa. And I believe your acquisition tells a lot about your vision about that as well, because you are bringing knowledge and expertise from both worlds to create integrated projects.
That's absolutely spot on, Fabio, right? We see Pi as that core foundation for digital transformation, right?
Got it.
And we see the two communities merging together to drive more value, to drive and accelerate scalability, right? So there's a purpose and there's an intention to the data and to the tools that we're using, right? But at the end of the day, when I look at InflexionPoint, right, we are a industrial digital transformation company, heavily rooted in automation, right? OT, IT integration, AI and analytics, right? And what that means for us, and one of the primary reasons that we acquired this company, because we think that Pi facilitates a lot of that, right?
Excellent.
So we have the ability, the expertise, the insight to help extract data, traditional data, right? Whether it's from sensors, PLCs, from SCADA, from historians, transform that data, contextualize that data, enable that data for insights, for predictive insights, right? Enable that data for integration across the enterprise, enable that data with clean quality data for AI, right? AI is, oh my gosh, you know, when I was at Microsoft, you brought this up. We always looked at that early adopter phase, right? And we were always trying to bring our customers closer to that adoption rate, right? You look at technology today, right?
The speed of change.
It's amazing. In adoption, right? Chat GPT, how long did it take them to get?
2 months.
2 months to what, 100 million users?
100 million users. And I've heard that DeepSeek took 36 hours.
That's phenomenal, right? Well, that's the rate of change. Now, the thing that we have to be very, very sensitive to and very, very careful about, right, is the shiny object in the room, right? The technology that everybody wants, right? You got to take a step back and you got to ask yourself, why? You begin with why. What is my business charter, right? How do I connect business value to technology execution, right? And there's lots of different ways to do that. But at the end of the day, you have to be intentional about that aspect of it. Because, you know, I heard in the conference this morning, blew me away, 95% of all AI projects fail. Why is that? Because we didn't start with the why, right?
It was technology for the sake of technology, not with a clear goal, with a clear problem to be solved.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the platform and the technology is there to allow us to excel in operational excellence, right? So when I take a step back and I look at traditional environments, right, there was Six Sigma, there was lean manufacturing, and you know that ROI curve is like this initially, right? Because you're driving process and you're reducing quality, and you're driving increasing quality, but you get to a point where you start leveling off, right? Operational excellence is that next step of digital transformation that can really help you from an operational perspective.
I think it's impossible to argue against those arguments. They are just factual. I would add that in addition to that, instead of that, but in addition to that, talking to partners and talking to customers as well, a big reason for failed initiatives when it comes to AI and value delivered, even in cases where they had the clear business objective, was the fact that the data was not contextualized enough for the AI agents to drive meaningful and trustworthy conclusions out of that, right?
Absolutely.
So it was just, to your point, the excitement, let's get it done. But it's easy, right? Nowadays, let's be honest, it's easy to get data from sensors, put the data in a data lake and tell data scientists, analyze it, right? But data per se, without the correct context, especially with all the domain knowledge that we have in industrial data, right? What we call industrial intelligence. To put all this metadata around the data, right? Where it comes from, what equipment is linked to other equipment, the assets hierarchy, the engineering units, the minimum value, maximum value, normal operations, cause, effect, blah, blah. All this contextualization, along with the actual raw data, is what enable any, either organic intelligence, right, a human being, or an artificial one through the AI agents, to drive trustworthy conclusions out of this data, right? So I agree with you that there is some sort of, I wouldn't say hype, but misuse of the power of AI in some early adopters, but also too much emphasis on the data, disproportional to the emphasis that should be given to the metadata, to the contextualization of that data, for that few to be correctly used by the AI agents.
I absolutely agree, right? One of the things that I really like about our company is that we're very plugged into industry standards, right? Industry standards help you, from a contextualization perspective, really identify your assets, your attributes, make them consistent across the entire enterprise, so that it facilitates, the integration. It facilitates the insights, right? And when you add data governance to it, right, so that you have quality data, then AI is learning on good data foundation. When AI is learning on, data that isn't good data, right, that isn't contextualized, it's the same thing as a data scientist going through a data lake, trying to make, heads and tails out of, timestamp value, what does this information mean to me, right?
True.
Yeah.
True.
So
just more efficient. Nowadays, you have to be more efficient because, case in point that we were talking a few minutes ago, things are changing faster, right?
Absolutely.
It's not they're changing more, they're changing faster than ever, and much faster than ever, which minimizes the learning curve that you can afford to have in order to remain competitive, right? Which makes me think about another point I would like to learn from your experience. How to keep your staff up to date, right? How to keep your engineers, not only the young ones, but even the more senior ones, up to date with what's available today, remove the hype out of the reality, and remain competitive in a world where the best practices from 5 years ago are not applicable anymore, and the ones from today most likely will not be applicable 5 years from now. Not all of them. Some things are timeless, but when it comes to changing from on-premise system to hybrid technologies, cybersecurity today is completely different from what used to be cybersecurity discussion 10, 20 years ago, right?
Absolutely.
So, case in point, it's changing. How you keep your people up to date?
That's a great question, right? And it's not an easy problem to solve, right? When you take a step back, you have to put some of the onus on people, right? People that want to learn, they have the desire to learn, right? And then you enable them. Okay, you enable them with conferences like this, right, where they can submerge themselves with leaders, with subject matter experts, with the community to learn from each other. That is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to really understand where the industry's headed, what the priorities are, and what's trending. Because what's trending is what our customers, when they see value, potential value tied to technology, it could be the shiny object in the room, but when there's business, business value associated with it, then that accelerates that opportunity. But I would say, what you have done with AVEVA is amazing, right, Fabio?
It's a teamwork.
No. But this is really, really good. You're empowering your ecosystem, your partners. You're facilitating certifications and training, right? That is the key. If I want to support your platform and I don't have a way to come up to speed, I don't have the collateral, I don't have the webinars, the YouTube videos, the subject matter experts that I can go to. That's a big challenge for me, right? And conferences like this kind of help bring it together, right?
Very happy to hear that, and you have my commitment on tape that will continue investing in more and more in enablement, right? I would say the top one priority, at least for my group, is to provide enablement in a very cost-effective way and fast way to our partners as well.
That's fantastic, and we're all geared. Our CEO, I don't know if I should be saying this, but our CEO has a bonus program for AVEVA certification.
There you go.
For some of our folks and our resources. And that's exciting, right?
Wonderful. Love to hear that. Hopefully other integrators will lead them on the same idea. Because at the end of the day, it's about competitiveness, right? The more you learn about the tools, the more competitive you are, the best you can deliver value to projects. And obviously for AVEVA is essential, because no matter what, if the project is poorly delivered, it's your name there, is the integrator name, is the AVEVA name, we all lose, right? On the other hand, when you develop it to deliver value, leveraging the product with the way it was designed to be designed, and the project delivers value to the end user, it's great success story, both for the integrators and for AVEVA, and help us both continue to grow.
Yeah. Right? So I will make 2 points that that I think are vital and important, right? Number one is scalability, right? The ability to scale at an enterprise level is amazing and powerful, right? Yeah. We have examples of customers like J&J Litis, right? Where we started out with a couple of their templates and we're able to scale out across 6 manufacturing platforms in succession, right? Driving statistical process control, driving KPIs. But the ability to do that on system platform was phenomenal, right? It was the templates, an object model, and a great way to scale the process, right?
You build the template once.
You got it.
And then replicate multiple times.
Multiple times. Yeah. The other thing that's really important, and one of the primary reasons that that we're on top of the AVEVA bandwagon, right, is reducing our time to value for our customers, right? Being able to take a solution, drive a specific ROI associated with that solution. So you tie it to business value, you roll it out quickly, almost like an agile methodology, right? Is just fantastic, right? Yeah. And the platform facilitates us to be able to do that.
Excellent. So pleased to hear that, and even more pleased to hear from customers that are hiring InflexionPoint to integrate projects with AVEVA software and receive the positive feedback from them. That's why you keep your certification status within AVEVA, which is less than 10% of the system integrators in our ecosystem today. So thank you for investing on us. Thank you for investing in our technology. Thank you for keeping up with what we have to offer to our customers and doing a great job delivering that. And just to wrap up, AVEVA is using this concept of industrial intelligence for our vision in our roadmap on the products, right? How to make our products deliver on industrial intelligence, right? Which I believe combines 2 concepts. Number one, keep true to our roots in industrial automation, right? Yep. We are not losing our identity. We continue delivering platforms and products for industrial solutions.
Absolutely.
But the second one is more based on new technologies and the infusion of AI in virtually anything that is being driven to the market today, and this ability to, or this demand to deliver more and faster, more value and faster than before, right? But in your words and for your company, what is industrial intelligence to you in a more, I'd say, comprehensive way? And if you can summarize at the end with 1 word, what's industrial intelligence for you?
Oh, that's a great question, right? Industrial intelligence, for me, really represents the opportunity to drive operational excellence by leveraging data and insights, by empowering the plant worker on the floor with the data that he needs at the time that he needs it, with the right context, right? To be able to build in AI and machine learning to drive quality and quality assurance. Intelligence to be able to make decisions quickly, right? To look out and be more predictive as opposed to looking in the rearview mirror, right? You're driving your car, you're looking in the rearview mirror. That's a report that was done last week or 2 weeks ago, right? Yeah. I don't want to do that. I want to keep my eyes focused on the road ahead, right? And manufacturers want to do that too, right? What does my forecast demand look like? What does my supply chain inventory look like, right? How can we drive more yield? And you start looking at insights by the way that you enable the data, right? And if I were to summarize it in 1 word, I think I just used it. It's all industrial intelligence. In 1 word, insights.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Rene, thank you for the partnership.
Absolutely.
Great to see you again. Look forward to the next talk.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for hosting this great event.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.